Hello, this is chapter 24, The Storm. The following afternoon, Ariel and Robin were on watch, perched on the roof with their binoculars. Danny sat on the desk, chiseling his initials into the railing with his pocket knife, while Julian put the last layer of varnish on his little box. They were discussing the best way to construct a zip line to the ground when they heard Robin's whistle. Looking into the forest, they saw Molly standing on the fallen log, dwarfed by a tall man with dark, wild hair. She pointed to the treehouse, then turned and ran towards home. Hello, tree sitters, the man called up when he'd reached the base of the tree. I'm Bruce from the Chronicle. Robin grinned. They hadn't been certain he would come. Do you want to come up? She asked. You'd better not be one of Carter's spies, Danny shouted. Bruce burst into laughter. Trust me, I'm a bona fide journalist. Eleanor Lee sent me. Those are the magic words. Danny lowered the pulley seat down. Bruce squeezed into his chair and, without waiting for instructions, started pulling on the rope. Soon he was lurching towards the treehouse, his long, hairy legs dangling below him. He extricated extricated himself with some difficulty from the chair and then stood looking about him with a bemused expression. The treehouse was now fortified for their stay. The sleeping bags were neatly rolled up, and baskets of walnuts and apples and a large water jug were set out on top of the storage bins. Inside the bins were even more supplies: peanut butter, several loaves of bread, a pound of cheese, boxes of cereal and crackers, a container of powdered milk, and 2 jars of jam. Ariel offered Bruce 2 chocolate chip cookies. Then he sat down on one of the storage bins and began firing off questions. He wanted to know their names, their ages, what they studied in school, the big history of Big Tree Grove and the Greenlee land, how they'd found the tree house, how long they'd been here, what they ate, and whether they were scared to sleep up in the tree at night. Occasionally, he would grab another cookie and jot down a note on his yellow legal pad. After they had talked for nearly an hour, he turned and said, So, Julian Carter Lee, how does a nice guy like you end up butting heads with your own uncle? Are you two still on speaking terms? Well, Julian stammered, we haven't really spoken for a while. I'll bet, Bruce said, laughing. So here he is, the new CEO of this hotshot investment firm, and you start a protest. Julian blushed. I wasn't really thinking so much about my uncle. I was thinking about Big Tree and how it's been here for so long, practically forever, and that it would be a terrible thing to cut down all these trees. Bruce jotted some notes down in his legal pad. Where did you guys all meet, anyways? We're pretty far from San Francisco. Julian glanced nervously at Robin. What? Bruce's dark eyes darted quickly between the two of them. Did I say something wrong? What's the big secret? We're old friends, Julian said. What? How old? Since you were 6 or something? We were pen pals, Robin said with a false smile, part of the homeschooling curriculum. Bruce gave them both a hard stare, then shook his head. I can tell when I'm being stonewalled, he said, but I'm glad your grandmother called. Eleanor Lee's the best journalist I know, and you guys have added a nice human interest angle. Nobody cares about all these THPs and departments of this and boards and of that. He flipped through the pages of his legal pad. Okay, just one last question. What's your message to the world? This THP is terrible, Robin said. The Greenlee property was harvested sustainably for years, and it still should be. They should preserve Big Tree Grove and any other old growth forever. Bruce raised his eyebrows and jotted down a few notes. There's a bunch of big wigs getting rich off of trashing this place, Danny said. They should go to jail instead. It should be against the law, Julian said. Ariel, who said only a few words during the interview, suddenly broke in. My mother used to play in Big Tree when she was a little girl, and Robin and I played here when we were little. The clear cuts, they're the ugliest things you've ever seen. The ground all ripped up and slashed all over the place. Look around here. There's nothing half There's nothing half as beautiful as this in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Phoenix. If they keep cutting down the trees, nobody will even remember what a forest is supposed to look like. Julian looked at her in surprise. It was like the running. She dawdled around and then suddenly she was moving like lightning. Bruce finished scribbling, then put away his notepad. If I don't get lazy, the story should run on Wednesday. He took several photos from up in the tree house and then lowered himself, hooting and laughing to the ground. Holding up his camera, he told them to look serious, then angry, then crack jokes to make them smile. Robin threw him an apple for the road, and he caught it with a flourish and headed down the path. The next afternoon was hot and muggy, and by the evening, the heat still hadn't broken. It made everyone listless and took away their appetites. The girls lounged in the cabin reading. Danny started chiseling his initials deeper into the side railing. Julian watched him, wondering how he could be so stupid as to lose his father's knife, and thinking he would never again have anything half so cool and perfect. Finally, Ariel roused herself to cut up some cheese and tomatoes in the all-age sandwiches and granola under the colorless sky. Wouldn't you love to climb up to the top of the trees? Robin said when dinner was done. She was lying on the storage bins, staring up at the treetops. We could do it, Ariel said. I bet John and Dave could teach us. Oops. John has a friend who climbs redwoods, Robin said. It's his life. John said he saw all sorts of cool things up there. There's huckleberry bushes growing right out of the tree trunks. There's rhododendrons blooming. I don't know if I said that right. There's little miniature bonsais. I don't think I'm saying that right either. Sorry. Growing in the crooks of the trees. They're growing in dirt 200 feet up. These little trees are more than 100 years old, and they're growing out of the branch of a 1,000-year-old redwood. Trees in the trees, Ariel said. That's what he said. Robin crossed her ankles and wiggled her bare toes. These trees are so old, they're older than the dinosaurs. When all the continents in the world were still mushed together, there were redwood trees or something like them. The asteroids that wiped out the dinosaurs, the redwoods were fine. John said they covered half of the world. Then they shrank down to just California, and then the loggers came along and cut them all down. The end, Danny said. That was a cheery little story. Well, Big Tree's still here, Ariel said. That's kind of amazing when you think about it. Robin got to her feet and poured lemonade from a canteen into her tin cup. Can't wait until the story comes out. They rinsed the dishes in the creek and the girls ran off to the outhouse. When they returned, it was nearly dark. Julian helped them out of the pulley seat and cleated the rope. Now that he was used to the treehouse, it felt like the safest place on earth, safer than the city. Any decent burglar could break a window, he figured, but it would be almost impossible to break into the treehouse in the dark. It was almost too hot to get inside their sleeping bag. Julian was just looking for his flashlight when the sky flickered, casting a momentary gray light over the treehouse deck. Lightning, Ariel cried. The sky flashed again. This time they heard a low, angry rumble in the distance. A feeling of dread stirred inside Julian. He'd never seen lightning in San Francisco. I love storms, Robin shouted, looking up at the sky. Julian could hear the wind coming before he felt it, warm and damp and smelling of salt and sap. The branches above them bowed and swayed. Correct me if I'm wrong, Danny said, but is it possible that a treehouse is not exactly the safest place to be in the middle of a lightning storm? As if in answer, a bright fork of lightning ripped across the sky. Julian stood transfixed. The trees shifted uneasily, and soon the sound of the wind swept over the tree was like the roar of the ocean. A few heavy raindrops blew onto Julian's face. A tiny cup went rattling off the storage bins and across the floor. We better get our stuff inside, Robin called, before it's too dark to see. Her alarm stirred them to action. Julian and Danny grabbed their backpacks and pillows and sleeping bags and threw them into the cabinet while the girls stuffed everything else on the deck, dishes and canteens, notebooks, 2 candles, a box of crackers, into the storage bins and slammed the lids shut. When they were done, the deck looked strangely bare and abandoned in the dim light. The sky flickered again, and Robin started counting out loud. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. There was another low rumble. 5 seconds, Robin said. That means the storm is still a mile away. Danny looked up at the sky, his face tense. Let's get out of here. I'm serious. Let's go back to the house while we still can. We're safer here, Robin said. Besides, it's too late. It's already dark. There was another bolt of lightning, then a low crescendo of sound that exploded into your ear-splitting clap of thunder. Ariel gave a little shriek, and Danny cried, "We're going to die." They ducked into the cabinet. It was even darker inside than out, and Julian had to blink a few times before he could see a thing. Finally, Danny, who'd been fumbling through the bags, turned on his flashlight. In its eerie white glow, he crossed himself quickly. "Oh God, don't strike this treehouse," he muttered. "I promise to be good for the rest of my life." Robin was still standing near the doorway, peering into the forest. "That was a big one," she said, "but I don't see any flames. I don't think it hit anything." "Remember that tree in town?" Ariel said. "It was hit by lightning and burned to the ground." A forest fire or a lightning strike. They weren't so common. At the Monterey Aquarium, Julian had learned you were more likely to be struck by a lightning than attacked by a shark, and he'd always found that reassuring when he was swimming in the bay. But now, sitting 30 feet up in a tree in the middle of a lightning storm, Julian didn't find it so comforting. There was another crash of thunder. Danny's flashlight dimmed and went out. "Oh, great," he said in a pained voice. "Doesn't anybody else have a flashlight?" Julian fumbled around, but the bags were all jumbled together and it was almost completely dark. The treehouse trembled, and all at once the rushing sound of the trees seemed to expand until it was so loud, it was as loud as a rushing waterfall. Dense rain descended on the forest. With the rain, the last traces of light vanished. "I can't see you guys. I can't even see my own hand," Danny said with a note of panic in his voice. Ariel's voice came out of the blackness. "I'm right here, Danny." "Me too. I'm here," came Robin's voice. "I'm right next to you," Julian said. He scooted a little to the right until his knee hit what he thought was Danny's leg. "See?" The next clap of thunder was so loud that Julian jumped. Danny made a small whimper. A flash of lightning electrified the sky and revealed for an instant the inside of the cabin, and Julian could see that underneath the darkness they were all still there. Then it was pitch black again. They sat silently listening to the heavy drone of the rain. Each neon flash in the sky punctuated by a crack like a gunshot, was like a warning that they were in mortal danger. But it was too late to go back. Robin was right. They were better off in the treehouse than stumbling blindly through the forest. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet. "Whether I'm going to die now," Julian thought, "is out of my control." In the terrible blackness, he felt half dead already. He shifted his knee against Danny's leg just to reassure himself that they were both still alive. The tree shuddered. Surely they had been through worse than this, Julian reasoned. After all those years, what was the chance that the tree would be struck by lightning tonight? What was the chance that lightning would strike down the four of them when they had lived such a short time? On and on went the storm, a flash, a crack of thunder, and then the sound of rain gusting through the darkness. Each time the wind rose, Julian could feel the tree trunks tensing and bending beneath them. He knew, of course, that technically trees were alive. He studied biology in school. He learned about photosynthesis and respiration and cell division. But now, for the first time, he understood that a tree was an actual living thing, unseeing, unhearing, unconscious, but alive, and perhaps aware in some way, swaying with the wind, absorbing the rain, breathing. Their treehouse was anchored to a living thing, and all around them a whole forest of living things bowed under the force of wind and rain and electricity. Nobody said a word. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the rain stopped. The rustling of the trees rose up again through the darkness. The tree swayed back and forth, but stayed rooted in place. They stood there, Julian thought, for 1,000 summers and 1,000 winters, and each year would have would have had at least 10 bad storms, he figured. Storms where the rain pelted down and the wind howled. 10,000 storms. Somehow the trees had survived. And even when these trees died, the forest would still be there. After all, for a tree to die wasn't the same as a person, was it? A tree lived for hundreds of years, and how could you even say when it died? Old logs lay on the forest floor, slowly turning to dirt, and little saplings grew right out of their trunks. Through the windows, Julian could see the brightest flashes lighting up the sky. He breathed in and out in the blackness, listening to the hushed whispering of the trees, and slowly the periods of silence grew longer and longer. The growl of the thunder and the flickers of lightning grew fainter. An owl hooted and hooted again. The storm had passed. It's over, Julian said at last. They sat without speaking for another minute. I guess we should try to find our sleeping bags, Robin said, yawning loudly. Julian could hear her rummaging around. There was a clink, and finally the glare of her electric lantern lit up the small cabin. Julian walked outside and touched the floor of the deck. It was barely damp. The tree had acted as a kind of leaky umbrella over them. Danny was still slumped against the cabinet. Julian grabbed their sleeping bags and pillows from the cabinet and laid them out on the floorboards. Come on, Danny, he said. It's all set up. Without saying a word, Danny crawled out onto the deck and into his sleeping bag. Between the branches, Julian could see the stars blinking into view again. That was not fun, Danny said in a low, rough voice. You really shouldn't be in a tree during a lightning storm. All's well that ends well, Julian said. Fortunately, we're not dead, Danny said. Unfortunately, now I have to be good for the rest of my life. Julian smiled in the darkness. You know what, Danny, he said after a moment. What? I found that letter you wrote to Bob, Julian paused. I didn't mean to, but it was a good idea. What are you, an actual undercover agent? Danny said. Geez. Every minute it seemed like more stars filled up the black spaces in the night sky. It was like the storms had swept the air clean. Julian wasn't tired now. He was wide awake and filled up with something like happiness. Danny sighed and gave a little sniff. Lean on me, Julian sang out suddenly in the darkness. When you're not strong. There was a pause, and Danny bellowed on the top of his lungs. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. Oh, our poor ears, yelled Robin. Have some consideration, Ariel. We're trying to get a little sleep over here. Well, you don't hear me complaining about your snoring, Danny said. Mercy, the two of you are like a pair of elephants over here. Here we've been suffering in silence every night, and you jump down our throats just for singing you a little lullaby. Julian heard muffled whispers, and then the two girls started singing around. It had only one verse, and they sang it over and over. Stop, stop, the boys shouted. Truce, said Julian, no more singing. Robin stopped, and Ariel finished out the verse in her thin soprano. And her last note, the only sound, was the soft shush of the redwood canopy far above them. Okay, that was the end of chapter 24. Let's see.